First thing, take out your homework over the last couple days and make sure your name's on the top. Give that to me.
You were saying what going?
Yeah. I think I was saying.
I thought you said we're going on. There is always a big one.
Oh no. Kelly Pickler.
Whoa, love that.
Not going in front of that camera.
What's that?
Not going in front of the camera. Gotta say incognito.
That's it. Yeah. Protect your identity.
Yeah.
This is supposed to have the story and
Bethany.
Yeah.
Are we supposed to have those like voice statements from that other one on here too?
The only thing that needs to be on here is your copying of Lamont's sentence structure and yesterday's question.
Yeah, I just did one sentence with like it's.
As long as it's a great sentence.
Hey, sir, I got some extras. You can just ignore them and just my notes.
Like mine's like a.
Well, it's not that
Yeah.
bad. It's just unique.
That's the way to do it.
It's really short.
All right. Like I mentioned earlier, we're in a bit of a crunch because we've missed so much time. So you are just going to get a lot of stuff thrown at you today. Normally, this would be doled out incrementally over the course of like a week or so with, assignments intermittently that would help kind of like nudge you along. But we got to try to catch up. So the way I've decided to do that is to just go for it and see what happens. Shoot first, ask questions later. That's how it would be, Sheriff. All right, I am handing out a sheet right now that defines what annotation is. Some of you, if you took AP Lang last year, might already have a little experience in the annotation game. This is just giving you some more tangible stuff. So when I ask you to annotate something, that means that you're reading it, and as you're reading, you're writing. Well, what are some of those things that you can write? So when you're annotating and you're having a hard time figuring out what does annotation mean or how do I do that, you can reference this bad boy. So keep this sheet near and dear to your heart until these things make sense. First thing, you can annotate to respond. So on a basic level, you can indicate your responses to what you read. For instance, say you read a passage about justice that speaks to you in a particular way, you might write your response like this, and then it just gives you an example of a response. Now, this annotation to respond is pretty significant. Most of the time, annotations are at most a sentence or two. 99% of the time, they are a word or a phrase. So if I was reading something that I disagreed with, let's say I was reading something about how somebody was making the claim that Dan Marino was a bad quarterback. I disagree with that vehemently. So when I'm reading, they say Dan Marino is a bad quarterback because he never won any Super Bowls. Well, I'm going to respond to that by maybe writing Joe Flacco won a Super Bowl, ? And he's a terrible quarterback, for those of you who don't know. Or who's another bad Super Bowl? Trent Dilfer. So I would put Trent Dilfer ? Now that's me disagreeing with it because I am referencing these quarterbacks that are bad. And I'm just doing so by putting their names. So it doesn't have to be as big or as robust as this. So you agree with something, you connect to something, you disagree with something, you're responding. It's making you think. So you'd want to put your response in there. The next one, this is the most challenging one. Annotate in order to discern a writer's methods or logic. So this would be, especially if you're reading something that you're having a hard time wrapping your head around. It would be the type of thing that you read and at the end of it you go, I have no idea what I just read. There, your annotation would be largely discerning the writer's methods or logic. So you'd be reading and then you would try to figure out what is each paragraph trying to accomplish. Like, oh, okay, so I read this, I have no idea what's going on. I go back to paragraph number 1. Okay, well, if I just treat paragraph number 1 as a paragraph, I'm able to figure out, this is the writer introducing that he is in Burma. Paragraph 2 is writing about how he doesn't like the natives. Paragraph 3, he's contrasting with paragraph 2. He's saying that the natives actually have this, that, or the other thing. And you're just trying to figure out the way in which the author is making their point. Or maybe they're using an illustrative example or something like that. So you can kind of see some example annotations in that vein. And then if you flip it over to the back side, this is the most common annotation, paraphrase or summary of main ideas. So kind of just what I mentioned with the author's logic. What's the point of paragraph 1? What's the point of paragraph 2? Or maybe you treat paragraphs in chunks of 3 or 4. He takes 3 paragraphs to make this singular point. So you summarize main ideas, and then lastly, etc. You can use our annotation to go beyond understanding text meaning and organization by noting your reactions, agreement, disagreement, questions, related personal experience, connection to ideas from other texts, classroom discussions, or etc. So this etc. just means however you can respond and fit what you're reading to what you've read. Oftentimes in college or even now, you'll be exposed to units, where we're going to have a unit on immigration in a little bit, where all the stuff we read is going to be about immigration. Well, by the time you get to your 3rd article, you already have 2 articles worth of background knowledge. And when you're reading article number 3, you should be reading it in the context of articles 1 and 2. So you should feel free in the etc. vein to make note of that as you're reading article 3. So to kind of practice annotation right now, we're going to read this bad boy. And all you're going to do, read this, annotate it while you read. While you're annotating, you want to think about either agreeing, disagreeing, responding, understanding their methods or logic, paraphrasing or summarizing main ideas, or connecting it to something else. So this is a much more active reading process. We get done at 2:10, right? It shouldn't take any more than about 15 minutes to be able to read this. It's a pretty short article, just a little do and a dad. So by 1, using my math correctly, 50, I want to be able just to go around and see that you have annotated. I'm going to look at your annotations later. Try to make sure that you have a response in there, that you have a summary in there, that you have an etc. in there. Just try to get at least one of each.
Bad word.
It does have a bad word.
What has a bad?
Title of the article.
Your mouth.
Okay, got it. Do you want us to label each one?
You don't need to label it, just be able to hit on each one. All right, 15 minutes to read and annotate. Ready, set, and to go. Anybody need more time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have I gone over intro phrase with you guys yet?
Yeah, you're gonna convert with me.
All of these? We're good with them?
Yeah. Perhaps.
All right, so I'm just going to come around in a moment and check in on your annotations. So I'll sit next to you probably for about a grand total of 4 seconds. While I'm doing that, you have until the end of class to make it as far into this as possible. Whatever you don't finish becomes your homework for Monday, but I think you can finish it before class gets done. Now, the assignments that you've done so far, you get credit for completion. So you handed those stuff in, you get points for handing that stuff in. This is going to be worth 10 points, and it's going to be either you get it or you don't. We haven't had class for forever, so I don't even know what I've said. Each unit is 100 points. So this narrative unit is 100 points. The next unit is 100. The next unit 100. And the final unit is 100. I handed out your assignment sheet for your narrative paper already. How many points did it say that paper was worth? 60. So that means there's 40 other points on top of that paper. 10 points coming here. So that means we're down to 30. Each of those writing assignments that you handed in the beginning of the year were 5 points apiece. So after that, we'll have 20 points left to get. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you bomb this, you get a 0 out of 10. Could you still get a 90 out of 100 for the unit? Yes. No, hopefully you're not going to bomb it. All right, so you have to complete the questions on the side. Each time you write a sentence, you need to do one of these bad boys right here. So each one of these questions that you craft a response to needs to feature one of the different comma types. Number 1, in the margins of the handout, annotate it. Well, you already got that done. So there you go. 1 out of 10. Number 2, write a brief summary of Crummy first draft. Focus on the main overall point Lamont is trying to make. Be objective and concise. I mean, it wasn't that difficult of a test or of an article, so that should be not too much of a pain. What does the title tell you about this essay in Lamont's attitude towards their subject? Pretty self-explanatory. Write down at least 3 words or phrases that caught your attention. Briefly say why these words or phrases seem interesting to you. Put a star next to number 4. This seems like a throwaway question. It is, in fact, the most important one. Seems like a throwaway because it's the classic, why do you think it's important? And then most people respond with, oh, I think it's important for, because it seems interesting. This is where you need to come out a little bit, where you need to have an idea, where you need to be keenly aware of what you do and do not find interesting. So, I'm going to be a bit of a turd on this one when it comes to you doing a good job of explaining why you think it's interesting. And if you don't think anything is interesting in there, then I would encourage you to read the part where they talk about write or kill yourself, or when they talk about comparing it to like a child, or like this. I thought the food part was especially interesting. Her writing about her process of coming up with drafts. You have to. It's not an excuse to say, "Oh, I just think any of this is interesting." You have to have an open enough mind to allow yourself to be interested by stuff. So 4 is a toughie. Cross out number 5. You don't have to do that one at all. And then for number 6, it says to go through paragraph by paragraph. If you want to group paragraphs together, you're welcome to do that. Like, so for example, paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 all serve at accomplishing the same point. Maybe 4, 5, and 6. Maybe paragraph 7 has to be on its own. So if you want to group paragraphs together, you can. It doesn't have to be individually based. Does that make sense, one and all? All right. So you have 20 minutes. Good luck. All right. Let me see.
Cool.
This when I walk in to get my raises. Wanted me to be a server. I don't know. They offered tips.
Basically, the first draft.
You don't like?
No, you don't.
Yes.
This one.
Oh, technology.
Does it work?
Yeah.
I mean, you did.
And then she's like talking about how cool it is that she the score for the commotion.
Yeah, right, you angry little bit.
Well, no. So, yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, right.
like,
Oh, really?
yeah.
It's like always pissed off.
How would you do
Did
that?
you wanna look at my annotation?
Stepdad,
Always kind.
Sorry.
so I don't get really like that much, so it's good. I guess I'm
We
not
gotta do
bad.
this.
Mine's so small.
You get tax return.
I feel like my
Yeah.
every single one of mine is literally like literally like
I highlighted Manson girls and those others. Harrison, Charles Manson.
I forget them. You know, I didn't have
So you went with the sign.
so did I.
Just really wanted to elbow you.
Hello.
All right, Maisie.
You have a nice mixture here. So this is a nice description of like what she's doing, and I like how you kind of bring it into like I have. Good job.
Oh, where's the title thing?
Although, I wanna frickin' know. I wanna know.
So,
Variety isn't great.
yeah, well, there's really not much that you can kind of like,
I didn't have a personal connection.
right, yeah, so you're stuck with the summary,
Yeah.
right, and just trying to map out our process, which is good.
Okay, remind me of the ACT.
Yeah.
Review? ACT, yeah, it's right there.
Choices.
Oh,
Put something
Thank
down.
you.
my legs.
Struggle of
Oh, my
certain voices in head. Voices? Right, 'cause she was replying to the friends. In the bottom,
Stop.
her outline of her first.
Good job.
Burn it. Thank you. Thank you.
Even highlighting.
Yeah, it's like,
57.
plus a whole what?
Right? Yes! Or wasn't it just boost?
Charles Manson.
Why did they write
Like 10
crummy
words.
first draft on here? It's actually shitty first draft.
I know.
She wrote shitty. Sometimes the first draft is just gonna be shy.
This was actually the title of Keely Erickson's first essay.
What?
Shitty first draft.
First essay for what?
How did
This
I
class.
do?
Good.
Oh, look at that. Yum yums. Sweet
Still on
potato
everything?
quesadilla. Sweet potato cheese quesadilla.
This cracked me up.
I like them all except for this one.
Yeah, I just kind of wrote that as a.
Well, and that would have been fine to put like main idea,
Yeah.
and then you underline the sentence that states the main idea.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
you know, and then you'd be in much better shape. So just keep that in mind.
Whoa, whoa.
So you just kind of like mapped out.
Yeah,
So a bunch of names.
Laid
it on her line. Yeah, so this is a nice broad understanding of what's going on here. And then if you can, something like that, just for your reference when you go back. I'm trying to-
Who is that?
Megan Russell. You know
No,
what's funny? My
it's
brother's
like
630, yeah, dude, my brother's 630 too. And my Jaden literally hates my brother. Who? What happened to her? Yeah, multiple times.
First
I
person.
don't even know what happened to her. Is she like sick or did she just shave her head?
Oh,
She
Shout out Dawson.
She mentally. And she regrets shaving it because look,
Oh,
she wears wig all the time.
Guys, you have the fewest annotations, like generally, but yours are also the most robust. You
It's
do
like,
a
look at
nice
her
job
skin,
of
dude. What's wrong with her?
kind of like getting into something. Don't be afraid of kind of hanging out in this more of like a quick hitter land. In addition to this, just to kind of, the more you can engage, the more likely things are to stick.
Gross.
I'm laughing for you, pal.
Honestly, feel like I learned that much. Which is probably a good thing.
Oh.
I think I should just deliberately screen.
Yeah, don't make them the same.